Today, wanted to talk about the upcoming push for the bill for the cannabis movement in Delaware. Delaware resident and shocker, somebody covered in tattoos doesn't smoke pot. This guy, I don't really care for it. It actually kind of puts me to sleep, and well, I've tried it a bunch of times, mainly in my youth. It's just really not my cup of tea. All that aside, I am super for the legalization, regulation, and the taxation of marijuana for a lot of reasons, especially here in Delaware. Reason number one, and this can be derived from what we've seen in Colorado, which I think recently has generated something close to $1 billion in taxes for its state. Which a bunch of that has been poured right into their public education system. That's something that here in Delaware we could really use. Our public education system in this state sucks asshole. We have some really good private schools, but the public school system, it seems to be really dragging ass and unfortunately is underfunded. The other big one is jobs. Not only do you have the direct jobs of everyone who works at dispensaries, but there's the people who grow it, the transportation aspects, logistics behind that, new businesses that come up, people who are going to open head shops. Then you could look at all the tertiary stuff, like if we went legal, we would be the only state within 7 hours drive that has legalized recreational marijuana for use, which would mean tourism booming. That's good for literally every single business that's in the state. That's your restaurants, your hotels, tattoo shops, everything that you can think of that's related to it. Then you get into the idea that Delaware, and specifically the northeast coast, and there's essentially running up from like Baltimore down all the way down south, there's like a heroin railroad running through this area, and the ODs are at an all-time high. Apparently it's opioid and fentanyl based addiction is gigantic here, and unfortunately the legislators are having a hard time pinpointing exactly what it is. But stats are coming in again from the states where it's been legal, and they're showing a decrease in not just addiction issues, but in overdoses. Because, surprise, surprise, people that just really want to relax instead of going to something really hard like heroin, there's those middle ground stuff where most of the people who actually have those addiction issues will tell you they started on perfectly legal prescriptions for pain pills. I can't tell you the number of times that I've heard the exact same story of neck and or back injury, which are tough to diagnose. There's not a lot of stuff that doctors want to quote-unquote operate on to fix the problem. So they prescribe painkillers. That's typically opioids like OxyContin and oxycodone and Percocet and Demerol, Darvocet, and all these other totally legal drugs that you can get a prescription. And every single case ends up being the same way. Either the person starts abusing their script, that's kind of their fault, or over time, as their body builds up that resistance to it, they have to start taking more of it, or they start doing something dumb like crushing it. And again, these problems tend to snowball, and before they know it, they realize, why would I spend anywhere between $15 to $30 a pill on the street when you can buy a $5 bag of dope? And a lot of them fall into the heroin trap that way. The other big thing you have to realize about the failed war on drugs in that respect is heroin's gotten more pure, easier to get, and way cheaper since the war on drugs started. And those are the three opposite things that should be happening in an environment where it's working or it's cracking down on it. It should be stepped on 100 times in a poor quality. It should be difficult to find all that stuff, but it's not. And unfortunately, owning a tattoo studio right here in Delaware, in Wilmington specifically, it's ground zero. Literally 6 blocks from where I'm shooting this video right now is what's known as like heroin capital of basically this coast. It's bad. All that aside, though, there's some reasonable doubts as far as, you know, what would the drawbacks be to marijuana. And for the most part, most of them are kind of bullshit reasons. It's knee-jerk reactions. I mean, as it stands, I think most of the recent polls are putting the people who want to see marijuana legalized, it's way over half. Some as high as 69% of, you know, polls show. Almost half of the people that are interviewed are admittedly former smokers, or they've at least tried it. So most Americans don't really have a problem with pot. And when you take all that and you combine it, or rather compare it to alcohol, I kind of can't really see a reason why alcohol would be okay with a person and pot wouldn't be, because almost all of the exact same issues that you're going to have with the legalization and regulation of marijuana, you already have with alcohol. Good examples of that, you know, if you're over 21, that's kind of your personal choice to, you know, participate or not. But if you're going to get into the health issues, which, yeah, of course, if all you're doing is quite literally smoking joints, yeah, you could be looking at potential for throat or lung cancer, or a higher chance of things like that. Even, you know, some of the diehard pot, you know, advocates say, yeah, your best bet is probably to vape it or to eat it, which could avoid a lot of those issues. But again, compare those issues, which are not nearly as dramatic as you would think, or associated with cigarette smoking, but look at liver disease and sclerosis of the liver and things along those lines that come with heavy-duty alcoholism. Typically, the alcoholics are getting way more fucked up health-wise than marijuana. The only issue that I've heard that I think there might be an element of truth to that's worth looking into would be the driving intoxicated aspect. New news on the front is that there's actually technology that they're starting to work with now. I believe it's a company out of Florida, and they're working on a breathalyzer test that essentially is able to determine whether a person operating a vehicle is high at the time of the test, or if it's just in your system. Because unlike alcohol, marijuana can stay in your system for up to 30 days. And all the tests can determine is, have you consumed it within 30 days or haven't you? That gets into some weird areas, because if you were at a Fish concert 4 weeks ago and you get pulled over today, you shouldn't, you know, get popped for driving intoxicated. You smoked pot a month ago. But apparently there's these new mouth swabs that are able to determine what the THC count right then and there is in your body, and if it counts as intoxicated. I think that's something legitimate. I think Colorado has actually had some reported problems with an increase in accidents, but it gets back into that, you know, how does it work? Would that really reduce the number of accidents? But I think when you look at the big picture and the huge amount of money Delaware would be able to make, the new jobs it would create, up to and including even veterans, which is kind of a joke, but because of the way the federal bank systems work, they can't take money directly from a dispensary because it's drug money, and while it might be state legal, it's not federally legal. So from what I understand, a lot of the states like Colorado, who have dispensaries that are doing sometimes tens of thousands of dollars in cash per day, they got to make deposits, and that's not exactly something you want to send, you know, one of your employees up the street with a backpack full of cash. So that has created a market for a lot of guys that are coming home from overseas with combat or infantry background or experience. They're getting jobs, because who better to put these dudes in a little bit of body armor, give them an M4, and have them drive an Escalade to literally pick money up from the dispensaries and drive it the few blocks away to effectively what would be an open laundering deal. It's a third-party company that essentially is able to make the deposit to the bank, through a third party. Everyone in that situation is going to make money. And again, in Colorado, you not only have the mom and pop shops that are selling bongs, bowls, and hookahs. There's T-shirts. There's THC infused treats and food and snacks and everything that goes along with it. Personally, I can't think of really any legitimate reasons to why it shouldn't be legalized like tomorrow. But I'd like to hear from you guys. If you have reasons why, let's hear them. I think most of the stuff that I've been hearing as far as why people who are against it don't really understand the issues behind it, and they don't really have the numbers. I've heard crazy stuff like people associating smoking pot with the same damage that it does to your lungs as cigarettes, but they've never even heard of vaporizers or edible. All that stuff aside too, it's basically ignoring the biggest part of marijuana, which is the dramatic numbers of benefits it's shown in the medical community. It's done everything from help people with Alzheimer's, ALS, strokes, epilepsy, you name it. And they even have ones that have really low THC counts, but basically it's, and again, this kind of sciencey pot stuff that I'm not familiar with, but apparently it's low THC. In other words, it doesn't get you high, but the CBDs in it are actually what's the medicinal purpose. And they've been using that with little kids who were previously on a lot of drugs, fistfuls of pharmaceuticals, to the point where it's damaging their liver and affecting the way how they live their lives. As where pot, which is pretty much as close to all natural as it gets, is making huge progress. So again, let's hear from you. Be sure to like it, share it, and subscribe to the video, and let's hear your thoughts. Till later.